Matthew chapter 12 verses 9 to 10 says, "And having departed from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, a man having a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbaths? So that they might accuse him." Matthew chapter 12 verses 11 and 12 says, "And he said to them, What man will there be among you, who will have one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbaths, will not take hold of it, and will raise it up? How much more valuable, therefore, is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbaths." Matthew chapter 12 verses 13 and 14 says, "Then he says to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other. And the Pharisees, having gone out, held a council against him, how they might destroy him." Mark chapter 3 verses 1 and 2 says, "And he entered into the synagogue again, and a man having a withered hand was there, and they were watching him, whether he will heal him on the Sabbaths, in order that they might accuse him." Mark chapter 3 verses 3 and 4 says, "And he says to the man having the withered hand, Arise into the midst. And he says to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbaths to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. Mark chapter 3 verses 5 and 6 says, "And having looked around on them with anger, being grieved at the hardness of their heart, he says to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees, having gone out, immediately began to take counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him." Luke chapter 6 verses 6 and 7 says, "And it came to pass on another Sabbath, he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there, and his right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees were closely watching him, whether he will heal on the Sabbath, that they might find reason to accuse him." Luke chapter 6 verses 8 and 9 says, "And he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man having the withered hand, Arise and stand in the midst. And having risen up, he stood. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you whether it is lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy." Luke chapter 6 verses 10 and 11 says, "And having looked around on them all, he said to him, Stretch out your hand. And he did, and his hand was restored. And they themselves were filled with rage, and were discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus." Luke chapter 13 verses 10 and 11 says, "And he, or Jesus, was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbaths. And behold, a woman having a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and she was bent over, and not able to lift herself up to the full." Luke chapter 13 verses 12 and 13 says, "And having seen her, Jesus called her near, and said to her, Woman, you have been freed from your sickness. And he laid the hands upon her, and immediately she was made straight, and began to glorify God." Luke chapter 13 verses 14 and 15 says, "And answering, the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, was saying to the crowd, There are 6 days in which it behooves one to work. Therefore coming, be healed in these, and not on the day of the Sabbath." Therefore the Lord answered him and said, "Hypocrites, does not each one of you untie his ox or donkey from the stall on the Sabbath, and having led it away, give it to drink?" Luke chapter 13 verses 16 and 17 says, "And this, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, behold, 18 years, ought she not to be loosed from this bond on the day of the Sabbath?" And of him, or Jesus, saying these things, all those opposed to him were ashamed, and the whole crowd was rejoicing at all the glorious things that were being done by him. Luke chapter 14 verses 1 and 2 says, "And it came to pass, on his going into a house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees on a Sabbath, to eat bread, that they were watching him. And behold, there was a certain man with dropsy before him." Luke chapter 14 verses 3 and 4 says, "And Jesus answering, spoke to the lawyers and to the Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they were silent. And having taken hold of him, he healed him and let him go." Luke chapter 14 verses 5 and 6 says, "And he said to them, Which of you whose son or ox will fall into a pit on the Sabbath day also will not immediately pull him up? And they were not able to reply to these things." Matthew chapter 24 verse 3 says, "And as he, or Jesus Christ, was sitting upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him in private, saying, Tell us when these things will be, and what is the sign of your coming and the consummation of the age?" Matthew chapter 24 verse 14. Jesus Christ replied, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the earth, for a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." To the one listening, always remember that Jesus Christ loves and cares for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you believe it, please subscribe, like, comment, and share so that others will know this truth. And don't forget to click the bell button so you will be notified of my next videos.